Hello, everyone. This is our Spiritist psychology study group, and I'd like to hand it over for our study tonight to Anahy. Over to you, Anahy.
Thank you, Fabricio. Hello, everybody. I'll just put the PowerPoint. Sorry. Fabricio, have you allowed me to share?
Yeah, I have enabled now.
Okay. Is that okay?
Yeah, we can see it.
Just okay. So it's big, right?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So today we're going on with the shadow and also the persona and the collective conscious, okay? So that everybody can remember, because sometimes people are looking to one meeting and not to the others. So some pictures to inspire us as co-creators of our own reality and of course our collective reality. But we have to face, okay, our shadow aspects, right? As we were talking previously. And just to remind everyone that about this image, that the persona and the shadow are complexes related to the ego, but also the shadow has this aspect of deep in the psyche, okay, the what we would call the shadow of the self also, okay. And Joanna talks about the personal shadow, as we are seeing here, then the collective shadow, and then the archetypal shadow, as we can see in aggressive behaviors, for instance, that are part of our the human beings, actually. But we are going to see more of that. And I don't think it's quite necessary to go to the previous slides, but just to remember, to remind everyone that Jung says that the shadow is the image of ourselves that sleeps in our wake as we walk towards the light, and that the shadow behaves generally like the inferior or negative personality, parts of us that we wish we were not like. And as Professor Corbett, we were talking last meeting about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, right, Lionel? Mm-hmm. He gave the example that it's quite useful for us to understand, and that the persona is a complicated system of relationships between individual consciousness and society. It is designed in one hand to produce a certain effect on others, and on the other hand to conceal the true nature of the individual. Why is that? Because the persona is that part of the personality developed and used in our interactions, our conscious outer face, our social mask that we use to adapt to society. The face and role shown to others and used to shape the outwardly visible image we have of ourselves, the way we feel we have to behave. Okay, these are just quick reminders. So the persona is collectively adequate, makes considerable concession to the outside world, forces the ego to identify with it. So this leads certain people to believe that they are what they imagine themselves to be. Sorry. And the shadow, so the ego usually is not aware that it projects the shadow because it's denied, it's unconscious, would have qualities recognized as immoral or at least not recommendable, containing characteristics of a person's nature that are contrary to the customs and moral conventions of society. The shadow hides behind the persona. Parts of the shadow may be positive, though, and I know a lot of people, Lionel, want you to talk a little more about this, about the positive parts of the shadow when we finish the PowerPoint, okay?
Okay.
And Lionel gave us the example of undeveloped talents, for instance. Well, I'll just go through that. We have already seen, but I wanted to remind everyone of this beautiful saying of Jung's sentence in Mysterium Conjunctiones of his collective works, that people, when educated to see clearly the dark side of their own nature, learn at the same time to understand and love their fellow man. A decrease in hypocrisy and an increase in self-knowledge can only result in greater consideration for others. Sorry, as we are easily led to transfer the lack of respect and violence that we practice against our own nature onto our fellow human beings. I think this is a very, very important sentence that can explain why in the self-discovery group we take some time to understand more about our shadow aspects and also about our persona, okay? Because we need desperately, I would say in these days, a decrease in hypocrisy and an increase in self-knowledge, because we need a lot more consideration for each other, especially in these days that we are living in, because of course the lack of respect that we show and violence, as Jung says, that we show against our own nature, we are going to project in our fellow human beings. Don't we see that happening a lot these days? So the I Ching, I brought to you this sentence last time. It is only when we have the courage to face things as they are, without any self-deception or illusion, that a light of events will emerge by which we will recognize the path to success. And the beautiful sentence by Jung, a person does not become enlightened simply by imagining figures of light, but by illuminating the darkness. So let's illuminate the darkness a little bit more. This is our, as Lana said, the dark side of the Great Mother, and as I like to say, illuminating the darkness, because it's the Great Mother, the Virgin Mary, that was sculpted in the lava of the Etna volcano, as I told you. And now let's come to Joanna. Joanna has a beautiful book called The Psychology of Gratitude. And in this book, she says that the lower feelings, which are the perverse inheritance along the evolution path, when only the domineering instinct is predominant, constitute barless prisons that limit the emotional and spiritual movements of the individual, for they constrain the illuminative process and generate suffering. Okay, so for Joanna, these lower feelings, they come from our inheritance, okay, along the evolutionary path. So they come not only from this life, but from past lives also. So she says that the word gratitude derives from the Latin gratia, which literally means grace, or from gratus, which is translated as pleasing. By extension, it means that the pleasing acknowledgement for everything that is received or bestowed upon. Okay, I brought to you a little bit of the Christian meaning of grace. Okay, so in Christian belief, we can summoning up that the grace is would be the free favor of God in an encounter where the human being is transformed. It reminds me about numinous experiences, Lionel and everybody. So it would be a grace of God given to us, okay? And through this grace, God confers upon man a participation in the divine life. But I would ask you to see this in the psychological terms, okay? Because what we are going to see that Joanna is calling us to understand is psychologically and also spiritually, not only religiously, okay? So to understand, as we were discussing previously when we talked about the self with Professor Corbett, that transpersonal dimension that we call the objective psyche, where all the archetypes and our, this inheritance of the humankind, we can say that it's found. And beyond that, in depths that we cannot even have we can imagine, but we cannot state that it's like this or that, would be our feeling, our understanding of the transcendent, that it's of God, if you want to call the transcendence, as or whoever or whatever you understand yourself that the transcendent means, your personal meaning of the transcendent of God, okay? So we cannot, understand for Joanna and for a lot of spiritual mentors, because we don't have yet, we would say, intellectual and moral evolution enough to understand, really understand God. We can feel it, okay? We can have a numinous experience. We can feel in our hearts connected to the sacred, but we cannot completely understand the sacred, understand God. So when Joanna is talking about gratitude and remember, bringing us the meaning, the word, sorry, in Brazil, the winter is coming. I'll have a little water, just a minute. So a lot of people is getting coughs like myself or things like that because of the winter. So what I want you to understand is that when Joanna is talking about gratitude, and she writes to remind us that the Latin origin of the word is gratia, so grace, and it's gratus, that it's pleasing. So a pleasing acknowledgement for everything, good or bad, that is received or bestowed upon us. So that would be the way to connect to God, because we say that God, and there are questions about that when we talked about Professor Corbett about the dark side of the God image. But for Joanna, the ultimate, let's say, reality of the transcendent itself, and for the Spiritist knowledge, would be all light, all love, all good, okay? So, and only our ignorance would make the dark, okay, or the non-light, if we could say, because of our ignorance of what light is. So light is always there. And when we say the grace of the transcendent of God upon us, we are talking about this practice of the connection of this loving energy that is within us as children of this source of life that we call God, okay? So gratitude, and to be grateful, to express gratitude, would be a way to practice and to interconnect everything, ourselves with everything else and everybody else, through this loving energy, okay? We will go on and I will explain better. But let's just take a look of what Joanna calls in Psychology of Gratitude, the science of gratitude. And pay attention, people, because when we say science, okay, we are talking about studying a lot, observing, analyzing, okay, everything that we do in when we are in a scientific posture or way of approaching something. So Joanna says that the science of gratitude, appears as the most elevated expression of psychological maturity in individuals, and it incites them to an existence with noble sentiments. In the beginning, it is an emotion that helps in freeing the individual from the anxiety of possession and accumulation. Discernment endows a comprehension that everything is dynamic in the universe, a means of giving and receiving, granting and reciprocating, and that any stationary behavior propitiates the onset of infirmities and maladjustments. Okay, so that's why she's asking us to pay attention and to study the science of gratitude.
Oh, sorry, Anahy, what does she mean by stationary behavior? I don't know what that means.
This is a translation that it's in a book that has already been translated, Psychology of Gratitude. I think stationary behavior means, for the people that translated Lionel, that it's, when you stop completely, when you, let's say you are going up a hill or something, and then you suddenly stop, okay? So it would be a behavior where you keep not going up and down, you keep stationary. Do you say like that in English?
Yeah.
That's the translated, okay, the translation. It's nice that you asked because I'm not sure about Joanna. It's very complex the way the sentences are written in Portuguese. So it's very difficult to translate to English. I know there are some people in the UK trying to translate a better translation. Yes, Sylvia, please.
I think here stationary behavior, thinking how Joanna actually speaks in Portuguese, is more in a sense of a person, he stopped doing anything, he stopped connecting with other people, not integrating, trying to help, or having a life, just go, back into oneself and hide. And that's what leads to depression. I think this is a kind of not connecting with other human beings.
Yes,
living just for themselves.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I think that's it, because the beginning of the sentence is discernment and those a comprehension that everything is dynamic in the universe, and we are part of, the psyche is part of nature, and nature is part of the universe, of course. So yes, I agree with you. Is that okay, Lionel?
Yeah, no, thank you. I understand now.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So for Joanna, in a clinic, sorry?
She means stagnation, I think, emotional and stagnation.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't want to change the translation. So it's nice when you have any doubt and we can exchange with people that are English speaking, because then we can make it clear for everyone that is watching, okay? Please do it more often if you have any doubts, and Sylvia and everybody else can help us. So for Joanna, in a clinical approach, in her words, gratitude plays a psychotherapeutic function of utmost importance in that it helps us understand the daily incidents, including those of a disturbing nature, without interfering with the balanced behavior that results from an awareness of one's responsibilities towards life. Psychological maturity awakens consciousness to its transcendental reality, overcoming the immediate impositions of the senses and expanding perceptions in relation to existential values. Okay, so Joanna thinks that gratitude plays a psychotherapeutic function, okay, because it helps us to understand these incidents that are happening to us all the time, in a sense that it helps us actually in this balanced behavior, okay, that results from one's awareness of one's responsibilities towards life. Let's see a little more about that. It is usually believed, Joanna says, that gratitude is a sublime feeling that works miracles of love due to its rewarding character. However, this concept limits recognition to the narrow aspect of acknowledgement of the benefit one receives and the subsequent eagerness in reciprocating it. According to our analysis here, gratitude is much subtle and more profound, putting it further beyond the mere recompensation for what the individual receives and experiences. So let's say what she wants to tell us about that. Why is it more subtle and profound? She says that when one succeeds in the practice of gratulation, even so being grateful, even when in relation to one's failures, the individual reaches the highest point from where gratitude must be experienced. The psychological meaning of reincarnations, she says, is for one to attain moral transformation of the self, capital S, Alana, and liberation from its concealed or germinating contents in preparation for new confrontations in the evolutionary path. Awareness of whom one is provides a renewal of the moral forces in the struggle to attenuate the shadow within and develop renewing experiences. Okay, so now she's saying that's why I was telling you that when she talks about grace, in the sense that it's in the origin of the word gratitude, and also and being grateful is also a connecting force to the transcendent, not only outside of us, but especially within us, within ourselves. And that in the evolutionary path, we have already seen this. She's talking a lot about, because for her, she considers Jung's self, concept of the self, as the spirit, the immortal spirit within us. So it would be our higher self, our superior self, if we could say, consciousness. So the psychological meaning of reincarnation for Joanna is for one to attain moral transformation of the self, of our spirit, and liberation of its concealed or germinating contents in preparation for new stages of development, we could say, okay? Because here clearly she's talking about the evolution and development of our higher consciousness. So awareness of whom one is provides in a whole, like say, as much as we can understand ourselves, self-discovering ourselves, would provide a renewal of our moral forces in this struggle to attenuate the shadow within, not only the personal, the ego shadow, but as we were talking previously, the dark side of the self, our shadow in the self, let's say, okay? And of course, then we are talking about, since we are all together in this, because of our common ancestry, so our collective shadow also, okay? And so we need moral forces to face all this struggle and to develop renewing experiences. And Joanna says, gratitude for one's apparent failures constitutes recognition and understanding that they are part of the learning process, and that disappointments in the form of moral sufferings, for instance, treachery, calumny, etc., have reasons to occur to which one might be subjected from past affections. She's talking here about also past lives. Therefore, it is better to suffer those difficulties, to experience them with resignation whenever they figure in one's life, than to ignore, camouflage, or postpone them. Why does she say that? Because she says, in a superficial view, one might possibly believe that such a situation is pathological, in that suffering exists in a deplorable masochistic disorder. For instance, if I think, oh, I have to suffer, and I know Professor Corbett has a lot to talk to us about suffering, okay? So, but what Joanna is saying, that we could believe that here previously, that to have a resignation with all these difficulties, that our failures, and remember, if she's talking about the self as the spirit, so the failures wouldn't be only of this life, would be from past lives too, okay? But as much as we can recognize and understand that, of course, we are going to fail, or we have already failed a lot in the past, okay? And that we are going to have disappointments. But all of these are part of our learning process, even if our own actions sometimes, of course, because we are in interrelated world with people, families, friends, and all, and we suffer, but we also make other people suffer, right? And not only, remember, Joanna is not talking at this point only in this life, but also in past lives. So if we can, of course, we have to try to struggle. We are talking about that, to understand better what it's still shadow within ourselves. But also in our daily experience, if we are caught in situations where we suffer treachery, calumny, or other things like that, that of course we are going to have, let's say, strong feelings about an experience like that. But Joanna is trying to remind us that we should suffer those difficulties, okay, and experience them also with resignation, because whenever they figure in one's life, okay, we have to face them, because we can, if we ignore, camouflage, or postpone, we are just increasing what it's shadowing us. And she goes on saying that, of course, in a superficial view, people could think that it's resignation to to suffering. Then it could be a pathological state of a masochistic disorder, for instance. However, for Joanna, it is rather the opposite. For such conduct shows a healthy maturity, because it is not a personal election for suffering, but a conscious acceptance of the phenomena of pain, which is part of the evolutionary process, okay? So to be grateful to everything that happens to us, good or bad, felt as good or bad by our egos, okay, would be a mature, for Joanna, a mature psychological form of facing these situations. And she says that when one acquires that habit of expressing gratitude, emotional ailments such as those of anger that converts into hatred, the resentment that becomes a desire for revenge, the envy that wishes for the destruction of others, and so on, do not encounter a place in the psyche to fester. Happiness for being grateful promotes an understanding of the insignificance of the offender, the fragility of those who become adversaries, for instance. So a feeling of serenity at this point fills every innermost space of the self, where those inferior sentiments would have been otherwise. I think this is very important. And that's why she's talking about science of gratitude, okay? Because it's not only our egos that are maturing in this experience, but also our self. And for Joanna, the ego complex, as we said, it's a right that the self acquires to be here in this life, living this experience. But the self is evolving, of course, as we are all evolving. So we still have a lot of shadows to face and to struggle with. But to be grateful, as Joanna says, happiness for being grateful promotes an understanding of all that is actually insignificant, okay? The offender is insignificant. We have to pay attention to ourselves. And also the fragility of those who become adversaries. And I think this is very, very important, because our collective, these days, okay, our society in different cultures, in the movies, in TV's programs and all this stuff, are always calling us to find enemies and adversaries outside of us. And it's hard to see a real movie or something in the culture asking us, okay, see the fragility of your adversary, really understand the insignificance of your offender. As Jung says, our enemy is inside ourselves, right? So we have to face our own inner enemies and darkness and not project all the time onto others. So going on, sorry. So I brought to you a little bit before going further in the discussion with Professor Lano, that in the Integral Human Being, it's another book, Joanna recalls that the psychological immaturity of human beings leads them many times to annul their own identity in the face of fears regarding struggles and the world in its aggressive characteristics. And I took some time to have a look at the year where this book, The Integral Human Being, was written, and it was in 1990. So yes.
What does she mean by annul their own identity? Leads them to annul their own.
Yeah, you're going to see here, because when this is a topic what she's saying, searching for our identity. So you're going to see when we identify too much, I don't know, with celebrities, for instance, people, even parents and things like that. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like this. Let's go to the other, but I just wanted you to pay attention that this book was written in 1990. So in the beginning, in the internet, we didn't even have the social medias and things like that. And I think it's really up to date. Look at what she says. It's kind of here talking a little about the persona and the collective conscious. Hiding the identity, the person masks himself, herself, with temporary personalities that she considers ideal, each one in turn, and that are copied from the behavior of people who seem to be exemplary, who have triumphed, who in some way have become loved or feared. Okay, of course, the child is going to do that with parents, for instance, we know that. But in adolescents, teenagers are going to do that a lot with people that they think as role models, right? But in a certain way, we are doing that with the social medias, with the celebrities and the influencers and all this stuff all the time, trying to kind of losing our own identity, right? And copy the behavior of people, the Instagram, the whatever, Twitter, and this and that, the behavior of people who seem to have triumphed and be exemplary, or have in some way being loved and even feared, of course, about the power. So she says that gestures and mannerisms, costumes and ideologies are copied, assuming their behavior, in which she displays and consumes until she moves on to other models in vogue that arouse her interest. We have this liquid times, right? There is always one celebrity, always somebody being canceled because somebody said this and that. So I think this is very up to date. In the superficiality of the staging, the person suffocates, says Joanna, generating more conflict due to the unsustainable posture she is forced to maintain. As an effect of the imbalance, she starts to pretend in other areas, avoiding the loyal and open attitude, especially towards her or himself, and maintaining the artificiality with which she covers himself, herself. The person distant from himself, herself, starts to have difficulties in his, her relationships, since he, she is concerned with pleasing, not being consistent with his, her inner reality, and mutilating himself, herself psychologically. He, she often abandons commitments, situations, and friendships without scruples that at the moment seem uninteresting or disturbing. I don't know, those of you, I know Lana has for sure a lot of examples, those of you that are therapists in some way, or in the health professions. Here in Brazil, for instance, the WhatsApp is a media, kind of a social media that we use a lot. I think we are the country in the world that use more the WhatsApp, okay? And one of the things that I hear a lot and bothers people a lot, for instance, especially young adults, for instance, is that they are kind of, they feel themselves as dating a person, and suddenly the person disappears without even say, and blocks, you know, I don't know how you say it in English, just stop talking, is blocking, Sylvia, yeah? So you can't see and you can't talk to him or her anymore. This through the WhatsApp. So it would be like, you know, you could think as a child says, I don't want to talk to you anymore. I'm not going to talk to you. But a person, an adult, that's really awful, I think. So I think, and this is written again in 1990, okay? So Joanna says that each human being is the sum of his, her own cultural, social, intellectual, moral, and religious experiences. His, her archetype, she says, is characterized by his, her experiences, not being equal to others. His, her identity is therefore the real individuality shaping his, her life, enjoying his, her actions and accomplishments. The individual has an emotional duty for Joanna to face himself, herself, to discover what his, her identity is, and above all, to accept himself, herself. Acceptance is part of intimate maturation for Joanna, in which the invaluable goods of life rise to consciousness, which begins to use them wisely, enhancing itself in the direct reason that multiplies them, okay, these goods of life. So, and just to finish so that we can hear a little bit of Professor Corbett, in Encounter with Peace and Health, another of Joanna de Angelis' books, and we have seen that in the meeting about the self, but just to remind you all, Joanna says that our spiritual destiny is the numinous state. Every commitment must be undertaken so that the process of moral and spiritual self-improvement takes place without setbacks or fear in the face of our progress and achievements. Reminiscent of ancestral inheritances, our ascension march is made of victories of the self over the dense shadow, which makes discernment difficult for the self or binds it to unhealthy habits that must be overcome. That's one of the reasons of reincarnations. The search for enlightenment, that is, the conquest of self-transcendence, is an imperative of evolution. So now I will stop sharing because we want to hear what Sylvia, Lionel, Kai, and everybody else that wants to talk Starting with Professor Corbett, what are your impressions, Lionel?
Well, my impressions are that this very up-to-date material, that there's a lot of recent neuroscientific research showing that gratitude is good for the brain and the body. It's associated with many benefits. If you can have an attitude of gratitude, usually mood and immunity and health and improve. Even things like chronic pain and illnesses improve if the person is grateful rather than resentful and angry. So this has now been shown by neuroscientists to be the case. So I think, you know, she's very up to date in that area. What she's getting at is a very high non-dual teaching, which is that the universe is unfolding exactly the way it's supposed to, and that whatever happens is supposed to happen, and our attitude to it makes all the difference. And if you can have an attitude of radical acceptance, it makes it much easier to cope with difficulties in life. That's why there's a mystical notion that the only prayer that you really need is thank you. That's no other prayer really necessary, because it expresses that attitude of acceptance. Somewhere she used the word resignation. I wouldn't use the word resignation. I think acceptance is much better, because resignation has that sense of resistance and resentment, whereas acceptance is a realization that things have to be the way they are, even when they're difficult. So I think
it's very good, Lionel, because I think the translation from Portuguese.
Yeah, well, it's a new word, but there's a difference between resignation and acceptance.
I think that's what she means. She is accept. It's a translation that doesn't use the proper vocabulary, I think.
Yeah. Well, let's hear some other points of view here.
Anahy, there is a question from Bob Williams on the chat.
Oh, on the chat. Let's see. Let's see. How do we make sure that we do learn from failures, difficulties, and bad experiences, rather than us just being resigned to them, repeating in our lives again and again? What do you think, Lionel?
There, I think she was talking, she was trying to distinguish acceptance from what's called moral masochism. That there are people who unconsciously feel as if they're bad and they deserve punishment. So unconsciously, they keep putting themselves in situations where bad things happen to them, like accidents and financial disasters and severe problems that keep recurring, because they have this unconscious masochism, feeling that they deserve punishment. So when she's trying to distinguish that, which is a kind of a neurotic problem, from genuine spiritual acceptance, which is simply being open to whatever is happening. So I think if you find that you're constantly getting into the same problematic situation, not just occasionally, which happens to everyone, but if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you have to ask yourself, what's going on in me that's making me put myself in these negative situations? Might be time to see a therapist at that point.
Yeah.
Freud called that moral masochism.
Yeah, Joanna says that when we realize that something is repeating and makes us suffer, we should see a therapist. Many times during her work, she says that. And Lana and everybody, I was just talking yesterday about negative coping, the coping, religious coping, what helps us to deal with suffering. And here in Lionel, one of the things, the negative coping that we see in research in health, okay, not only mental health, but also physical health, and that enhance actually suffering and pain and even death rates, is when I think that I'm being punished.
Yeah.
When I think, right, when I think I'm being punished, that God hate or is punishing me for something, and this is all this difficulty and failures that I'm experiencing are tests, or because God doesn't love me, or this and that. And this would cause a negative coping.
Well, unfortunately, there are some branches of Christianity that foster that attitude, that say if anything goes wrong, you're being punished.
Yes. And that's why I think Joanna's point of view, her contributions are so important, because as you said, Lionel, she's actually giving a non-dual teaching.
Yes, she is. She isn't using that language, but that's the background to it. Yeah.
Yes. Could you explain a little bit more? I don't know if somebody, Kai wants to, but then afterwards I would ask you to explain a little bit more about the non-dual approach, okay? I think Kai wants to make a...
It would take kind of a long time, but
we have.
Okay.
I think one of the ways to learn and not repeat the same mistakes is to identify the patterns that we keep repeating, right? Metaphorically, we could call them fractals, the repetitive behaviors from one life to another life to another life. So becoming more aware of our shadows, right? It's very pertinent to what Anahy was talking today and Lionel. It's one of the ways of diminishing suffering, but it's not easy, right? Because they are shadows, so we don't see them. But I think through the suffering, when we start like really feeling in our souls the misery, right, of our own actions, that's where we go, maybe in therapy or other ways, meditation, conversations with others. We become more and more aware of we have been doing certain things that are not good for us. So I think it's one way to prevent or to evolve, right? Recognizing the shadows that we bring from many past lives to the present life. But that's it. So.
Thank you, Kai. Kai, I don't know if everybody understood when you said about the fractals as a symbolic. Could you explain a little bit more so that people that are hearing us can understand better?
Well, fractal is a mathematical equation developed by Mandelbrot in 1978. And through the computers at the time, he was able to show these equations. So the equation brings like repetitive patterns. So when you look today, there are computer designs that you can access to the internet. Is very cool. And you start like from one main structure and in a bigger size, and the structure repeats itself in smaller and smaller parts, but it's always the same. And there is a loop in the end of the equation. There is a loop that happens in the equation. The design starts again, the same model, the same patterns. So when we go from one life to another and another life, and we keep repeating the same behaviors, We see the same, metaphorically, we see the same design, right? The same repetition. It's not necessarily that with the same people, sometimes it is, but usually it's the same way of dealing with certain things in life. For example, when we think that's always the other's fault, what we go through in life, it is a behavior and a thought, understanding of a projection, right? The other is always responsible for my suffering. And if I keep coming back, like Joanna says, in a masochistic way, and I keep telling the others that they are responsible for what I have been doing, what's going to happen? I'm not going to change. So metaphorically, fractals just represent the repetitive behaviors that we bring from lifetime to lifetime.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Lionel thought that we wouldn't have time. Oh, Sylvia wanted to ask something, then Anne, then Mark.
I just want to make a point to what Kai was saying, because I think that's exactly the point in which Joanna talks about pain and suffering that you showed this slide, because it's in a very positive way. It's almost the image that comes to my mind is from the prophet, Khalil Gibran, when he talks about the clay having to go to the fire to become porcelain, when you have to go to this really hard, everything becomes beautiful once you go through the fire of changing and everything. And it is a positive way. And I think Joanna emphasizes this quite a lot. And in her book, The Integral Man, it was just something going from what you were saying. She said that we need to feel pity for someone who hurts us, because it's a way of us coming out from feeling victims and transforming that in a positive. And I think you showed some of the slides as well that you talked about, but like that she says, you feel sorry for someone who hurts you, because that takes you out from the victim and from the desire for vengeance and everything. And she said love has to be a constant in our lives. And I think what the repetitive, like Hay was explaining, sometimes if we are able to break that vicious circle, that we are the victim, we suffer, and really try to see the other person as more, if they are inflicting something horrible on someone, they are more victims than the person who's suffering it. If we can really transform the way we think and use that and try to have the love, as she says, being a constant in our lives, we break all these old circles, because a lot of people have no idea about past lives. They have no, they just repeat certain things because the way they feel. But I think that's one of the things of Joanna. She reaches out to everybody. Everyone has a chance. Just reading her books, you don't need to be a spiritist or anything. And every time she gives us an example how we deal with that, going through the pain and transforming it into something light, going through the fire, being clay, and then become beautiful porcelain. I think that's the magic of Joanna de Angelis, that she teaches us how to compensate, how to come out of being a victim and becoming something that's positive. Sorry, I took too much.
No, thank you. It's beautiful. And Sylvia, before going to Anne and Mark, I just I didn't put in the PowerPoint because it would take much more time. But she gives the example, for instance, of St. Francis and the Apostle Paul, that would be grateful to everything. For instance, Paul the Apostle, in a sense, even the bad things that happened to him, because of this profound connection with the Christ, right, that he has in his numinous experience. And also St. Francis in in his prayer to the creatures, right? When he gives thanks to everything, even death, he welcomes death. So I think it's a beautiful example of what you are saying. I think Anne wants, it's Anne now.
Yeah.
Hi, Anne.
Hi, thank you. No, I was just thinking, I think part of, at least my personal, I can't speak for others, can only speak for myself. Part of our difficulty, my difficulty is because my whole education, the way you're brought up, the society in which we're immersed, teaches us the masks, pretending to others, hiding your real feelings. Even like if you go to a Christian church, you know, you shouldn't do this, or you shouldn't think like that, or you shouldn't. So you just pretend that you're not doing it. So you repress it all, but it's all there sitting in your shadows. And when it manifests, it's very shocking because, you know, it's exactly the opposite of what you are pretending to be. And I think that when Joanna invites us like to confront, I feel for me, it's as a mother, I see it's like bringing that child up from childhood to adulthood. It's time now for you to be responsible for your choices, for you to be responsible for how you decide you're going to navigate this and feel. And I feel that like we are like almost spiritual teenagers, and she's calling us to be spiritual adults. When I think of it like that, it makes it easier for me, because if not, I get confused, because if I speak to some of my friends, then people are not, you know, not thinking about self-knowledge, not thinking about psychology. They're thinking that you're a bit crazy, you know, because that's not the general conversations that are going on day to day outside this tribe or something like that. But I feel comforted by then slowly trying to identify what makes me feel uncomfortable. Those are my shadows, like sort of raising up, or what attitudes in others make me feel angry or something. So there's a clue. And then there's something for me to work on and to not be afraid. I think this is something that Joanna brings very strongly, is not to be afraid of our shadows, of those things that we think are bad, negative, blah, 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 that we have inside us. They're part of us. We can't make them go away by magic, not anymore, not by pretending. We need to be able to accept that this is where we're at. I'm not more advanced than I am. I am what I am. And I have all this growing up and maturing to do. If I think of it like that, it's less punitive than the church in the past would say, oh, you must eliminate all these bad things from you. You can't. It's part of you. You have to transform it and integrate it and grow and go developing. And so I think that she offers a different way of interpreting life and all the things that happen to us in life, which is not necessarily religious, but I think it's like this psychological approach that helps us to say, look, you're growing, but you can now take more responsibility. You can take on, you know, bigger tasks, if you like, which are the tasks of yourself, not about changing the others and changing the world. You can only be working on changing yourself, which will reflect, of course, around you and in the world. So I find it really useful, because sometimes I am surprised how she comes across non-judgmental in offering us opportunity to look at ourselves and to be brave and to say, oh, I'm not that perfect person that I'm trying to project or appear out there. You know, I'm not that. And it's okay not to be perfect, because we're not. And then that reduces all the stress of trying to hold on to that image that you're trying to show the world.
Thank you so much. And I think it's a very nice, you know, it's very nice that you can share with us, because it's, we are all in this together. And I like very much when you say this tribe, okay, because sometimes we are talking about psychology and spirituality, oh, they must be, you know, people so cool and so high up or whatever. And actually, we kind of joke with each other in the Spiritist community, for instance, because people are always struggling, as much as you know, and as far as you know, or you think you know, and you study. And I think Lana would agree with me also in depth psychology, for instance, in academic part. So as much as we think we know and we are so knowledgeable and intellectual or whatever, but especially in the Spiritist community, or a community that studies a lot, that searches for enlightenment, for instance, it doesn't have to be one or other, but I mean, when people have this common goal, okay, of course, the trick here, it's because we want enlightenment. We want to be, as Anne said, oh, I wish so much I already was a very good student of Joanna, or this and that, or I could teach, or when I go to the spiritual dimension, I'll be a very good teacher of whatever high spheres, or whatever is the fantasy, the illusion that people have. But the problem is that the trick here is because then, as Jung says, the shadow is always following us, right? So if we think we are caught by the persona, I have a lot of people that say, oh, Anahy, then you are a Joanna de Angelis teacher. Wow. Can you imagine that? Joanna de Angelis teacher. So I must know everything. I'm a very high evolved person or whatever. No, my goodness. Okay, because then, of course, the shadow would be immense. If you think in this duality that we are in this life, right, Lana? So if I think I'm so high up because I read a lot of Joanna, or I study a lot of Jung or whatever, then of course my shadow will be, very big. So that's why I think people like Chico Xavier, for instance, that is considered our greatest medium, the 19-something years of age, giving an example of being very humble, being like, Francis of Assisi and Gandhi and other high, people really high in spiritual evolution are so humble and so, so near to us. Chico Xavier, people would kiss his hand, grab his hand, kiss his hand, and he would grab people's hand and kiss their hands, and it was not fake. It was, he was like that. So I think this is very important, and that you said, because for us to face our shadows and for us to understand that it's okay to have shadows and it's okay to be what we are, and of course we all have some personas that we go through life changing the masks as we go on, but just don't identify. Sometimes they are needed. We don't need them here, I think, right? Because we are getting to know each other, even if a lot of people are going to be seeing this later on through Fabricio's beautiful Spiritist Center. Okay, they are going to connect and they are going to see, but doesn't matter because it's out of space and time, right? I always say, remember the monkey, Lionel and everybody, the mico in Brazil. I always say that when I finally go to spiritual dimensions, I want to see to be free and to be recognized, but from what I am in essence in my heart, with all the failures and the good parts and the bad parts. So thank you so much, and I think it's a beautiful example. Before giving to Mark, I don't know if Lana would you like to comment on what Anne said? No?
No, I'm very happy with what she said. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So Mark, please.
Yes, hi. Thanks for the presentation, talk, and our conversations. I identify a bit with Anne's last comments as it relates to, various things, but specifically confusion. I just offer a few things, at least, that has helped me make distinctions in this, and that whether we're talking about the personal, level, as opposed to, so to speak, the transpersonal level. So some of these, at least in my words, sometimes absolutes, as it relates to emotions, or karma, or and other concepts, I find, sit within, the spirit and the transpersonal level, which is timeless. Whereas I also have my personal side, which is embedded in time and, free will, ego, personality. And I think some of what is at times shared is relevant to the transpersonal and the spirit, and then the lower self as soul. But psychologically, a little questionable about invalidating someone's journey at a personal level as a, as a physical, embodied human. So I appreciated Anne's point as well, as a mother, and the concept of hiding feelings, and and how we seem to be systematically, frequently conditioned by wounded caregivers to, in those first 7 years, not have emotions honored. So I think it makes it very difficult to then later in life come up with kind of a mental will or certain concepts without having gone through the healing process of those first 7 years, which are basically all emotion. I mean, if we just walk around and look at kids in the first 7 years, they don't even have the cognitive structure, the mental hardware, so to speak, to do a lot of the reasoning and logic and mental that comes on in the second 7 years. So, I find at times that there can be a mental bias that somehow, if we just study some of these various concepts that are wonderful transpersonal, wonderful non-dual ones, but if the individual hasn't gone through personal healing, ideally ultimately down to the first 7 years, set up a lot of potential bypass and judgment from those that either have gone on the journey or have a more transpersonal view. And I guess just as a final point, I question whether we're supposed to be living in societies. My understanding is that we've created a huge exponential shift. Nothing in nature functions at an exponential increase like we've done in just the last few hundred years. So, I mean, my understanding is, as spiritual humans, we are supposed to be functioning in community, tribe, and so all of this emphasis on the use of the word society, I think this is a very blip of time that we're living in right now, where we've just gone past any sense of balance. So just offering some of those reflections on at least how the information was dropping in with me. So thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark. I don't know if Alana, would you like to comment some?
No, I think your warning about spiritual bypassing is very important. We can't ignore the human dimension.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why we were talking previously, and Joanna says, let's go back to the beginning of our conversation here, that sometimes we need help, right? We need to go to therapists, and we need to, like Mark was talking about childhood. So we all have our complexes, and one of the most important is our inner child, right? And sometimes it has been hurt a lot. So if we don't work with it, it would be, that's another thing. When I remember people, the mechanism of defense, that when we talked about the mechanism of defense of the ego, and Joanna said that for her, one of the worst, in a sense, would be rationalization or intellectualization, where we use a lot of intellectual statements and things to disguise what we really are feeling. And I think it's we have to pay a close attention to this kind of hurt and complexes and difficulties that we have. We can't bypass. We can't bypass the ego, but it's always it's a paradox, right, Lana? Because we have to deal with it. We are here exactly in this life to learn how to deal. The ego has to develop also, and to learn how to deal with our neurotic patterns, but at the same time to have this understanding of our spiritual development. That's why I wanted Lionel to talk a little bit about this paradox. I know that it's kind of a lot, but we can just start today and go on when.
Well, and maybe another time we could talk about non-duality, but it's kind of a big subject. But to me, she sounds like she has a non-dual background without using it.
Yeah.
And I think Jesus was a non-dual teacher. That's why in the Gospel of Thomas, he says, split a piece of wood and I am there, lift a stone and you will find me. Well, that doesn't make any sense unless it's non-duality teaches that there's no separation. Or Matthew 25 says, what you do to the least of these, you do to me, because he sees no separation between people. The Dalai Lama has a good metaphor for this. He says that if you imagine a bicycle with a handlebar, and one side of it is non-dual truth, and the other side of it is ordinary everyday reality, and you have to hold both sides to steer the bicycle at the same time. I think that's a nice metaphor, actually. The one would be the human level, and the other would be the spiritual side of it.
And maybe the human level, and I think that's what Joanna also, connecting everything that you all said, maybe the human level, it's going to be or would be less of a burden if we can understand that there is the spiritual level at the same time, right?
Yes.
I think it makes life easier, and the research in the mental health area show that when the person is more spiritual or searches for a spiritual development, the person is healthier and mentally and physically healthier. So this is already the medical field showing evidence, a lot of research in the last 2 decades, that this is a reality and that the person is also more mature. So I think that's because of this development. At the same time, it would be a little, it's nice that Mark brought all this need to not try to bypass our complexes and difficulties, because we need, as Joanna says, moral strength, right? When we are, for instance, working in analysis and therapy with some aspects that hurt a lot, when we are talking to our therapist and analyst about something, and the brain doesn't know that it's a past memory, the brain will react and will throw in the body, you know, a lot of substance like cortisol and all this that creates stress. So it's in the past, it's when I was a child, but it's today when I'm talking about, I feel as if it, it were today. So we cannot bypass this because there is a memory that it's also physical. So I have to face this. I have to work with these aspects that are pretty much from this life, from the ego, the experiences of the ego, from our complexes. And it's very important that we do that. But the moral strength, the spiritual strength that we get when we, especially also to face these difficulties, not to run from them, to think, as Anne said, that we all, I feel anxious because I think I should be like everybody in my church, for instance. I should be nice, I should not feel anger and this and that. No, I have a right because I'm a person as everybody else having this experience and suffering these experiences and traumas and this and that. But at the same time, if I have an idea or if I feel deep inside myself, that's the ego access, ego self-access, right, Lana? That it's so important. And we haven't talked about individuation yet, and we are going to be talking about that. But it's so important to find a balance, to find a better communication, let's say, between the ego and the self, because there are two instances, two domains, let's say, of our psyche that are there, and we need for this experience, for this moment of our evolution. So thank you so much, because I think it has been a great contribution of everybody tonight. And I know that Fabrizio, I don't know if you have talked to everybody, because we are still recording. I don't know if you have talked to everybody that open camera and make some questions, if they allowed the recording to be complete, or do you want me to ask them in this last minute, Fabrizio?
Yeah, I think what I have got from feedback from others, and that the discussion that we've been having after the presentation is so rich that people have been asking me if you can actually share the recording. And I think what we need to ask the group, if there is anyone that will have any problem for us to be sharing the questions and answers as well. If there is no problem, I would ask if you could share with everyone afterwards. So basically,
so does it just hands up, but does everybody have any difficulty? Can Fabrizio, yeah, up? Mark, is everything okay? Yeah. And okay, thank Danielle. Thank you so much, Dan, because people are really asking Fabrizio, oh, we want to see the discussion and the afterwards. And thank you so much, Lana. Would you like to say something?
No, I look forward to the next meeting.
Okay, in 2 weeks' time.
Wait a second.
And I can't remember the item, Fabrizio. We have already seen shadow and persona.
I'll have to miss the next one, I'm afraid. I'm sorry.
The next
I have to teach the next one, but I can be here on the 25th of June. So.
Oh, great. The next topic? It's
Anima, the woman within.
Okay. It's not such fun for you.
Well, I'll see
but it's,
yeah.
It's a lot of fun for her.
Okay, you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, and the Anima and Animus, it's great for these days. And then we'll see you in the end of June.
Yeah, 25th.
Yeah? Yes. Okay. Okay, thanks so much, everybody. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Have a great week.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Lionel. Thanks, Kai.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.